Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the IAA. Our event will be starting shortly. If you could all please take your seats, that would be very much appreciated. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everybody. It's wonderful to see you here, and to those who are joining online also. I'm delighted to welcome you here to this session today. Before we get going and to properly open the session, I'd like to invite Michael Gaffey, the Director General of Irish Aid, to welcome you all and open the session for us today. Thanks, Michael.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I seem to be with great regularity up at this podium to speak of the benefits of the Development Matters lecture series that we do with the IIEA. So it's a really good opportunity for us to open up debate on issues that might otherwise not get aired, and it's particularly useful for us as we move ahead towards our EU presidency in 2026. So really pleased to welcome Ambassador Johan Borgstam, the EU Special Representative for the Great Lakes region, to be the latest speaker in the series. And I welcome all of you who are here and those of you online. And I would just want to pay a special thank you to Jill Donoghue for and her colleagues for their endless determination in getting good speakers to come and speak and speak here. I think the first thing I have to say, and as I said to Johan when I met this morning, is, Ireland is not represented on the ground diplomatically in DRC or in Rwanda. We are in Uganda, and we cover DRC from Tanzania. We are very involved and have been very involved on the humanitarian side in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the situation there is bad. And I have to say, in the current environment, we would be extremely worried that the situation there will get worse, not just because of violence on the ground, but because of I'll be very diplomatic, the very constrained environment for humanitarian assistance at the moment. So we would be very concerned about the humanitarian situation. We are very, very glad that there is again an EU special representative for the Great Lakes region, and we are very glad that it is Johan Borgstam. And I had a meeting with him this morning, and I know that he will really engage with you today on the absolute complexity and regional dimensions of the crisis in DRC. It has attracted a relatively, I suppose, high degree of international attention and media attention, but that is always fleeting. And the situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo at the moment is extremely worrying. And I think Johan is the right man to be there. He has great experience. He has been an ambassador in the Congo, but he understands the region and he understands the tensions and the international environment perfectly. So I won't introduce him at great length. I just want to say to you that if you think you understand in any way what is happening in the DRC at the moment, listen very carefully to him, because it's not nearly as simple as it is sometimes presented. And the cast of characters involved in this are not just in the region, but also international. So for Ireland, we want to play whatever role we can within the European Union, and therefore the advice of the EU Special Representative is really important to us. And we also want to play whatever role we can on the provision of humanitarian assistance. And we are already providing annually, I think it's some 17 million euros, and including through Irish NGO partners who are working hard and who have been affected by some of the aid cuts recently. So I would just, in closing, make the point that our ministers have been making recently. We, despite developments in other places, the government is committed to annual increases in ODA during its term, and we will not be cutting our ODA. I wouldn't be complacent about that, but it is the intention of government not to cut ODA, to grow our ODA. We will not change our priorities either, with a firm focus on trying to reach the furthest behind first. But what we will probably have to do as the situation develops is look again at how we implement, how we achieve those priorities, and through whom we work, because of the changing environment. And on top of all of that, to have a crisis, both humanitarian and geopolitical, in the Democratic Republic of Congo at this moment makes things even more difficult for the people of the region, but also for the international community. So I can think of nobody better to explain it all to you than Johan Borgstam, the EU Special Representative. You're very welcome, and thank you everyone for coming along.
So I want to say a huge thank you to Michael for properly opening our event today. I haven't introduced myself. I do apologise. My name is Susan Murphy. I'm an academic. I'm an associate professor for development practice based in Trinity College Dublin, and I'm also the chair of the Development Studies Association of Ireland, which I think is one of the primary reasons I was invited to participate in today's event. My task today is to chair this very exciting session. We are very excited to have Johan with us today. Before we get going, I would like to welcome, we have about 50 or 60 participants online, so I would like to acknowledge and welcome all of those virtual participants today. And very much encourage you to place any of your questions into the Q&A session on the Zoom call. I would also like to remind members of our online audience and also members of the audience here today that the events are being recorded and it is being live streamed onto YouTube also. Now, so with that, I do want to do a very, very brief formal introduction to the European Special Representative for the Great Lakes region, Mr. Johan Borgstam. Johan took up this role in September 2024. And in this role, his primary activities are around supporting the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs in implementing the European Union's foreign policy objectives in the Great Lakes region. So his mission is very much to contribute to building a stronger, more comprehensive and strategic partnership with the countries in the region, and also maintaining very close contact with the primary organizations and fora, such as the African Union, the East African Community, and also the United Nations, the international financial institutions, and non-state actors where appropriate and when relevant. And so Johan will speak to us for about 20 minutes, and then we will open it to questions and answers. And with that, I'm delighted to welcome you, and the podium is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you, Susan, and also thank you for the very kind and warm introduction. I'll see if I can live up to all the hype. When I started out as Swedish ambassador in Kinshasa, after 2 months or so, a friend told me that if you're not confused, you haven't understood. So if I leave you slightly more confused when you leave today than when you arrived, I guess I have succeeded one way or the other. Michael, you referred to the humanitarian situation on the ground, and I think it's a good starting point, because that really illustrates very well the challenges that we are facing now. So I think since the start of this year, there's been another 1 million internally displaced added in the DRC. So now we're talking about roughly 7 million all in all. And this also has, of course, spillover effects for the neighboring countries. So in Burundi, they've received more than 100,000 refugees from the DRC. And, you know, just a couple of weeks ago, I was in the Cibitoke region in Burundi, in a refugee site. So it's about 40,000 people centered around a football stadium in pretty horrific conditions. But those conditions were also an illustration to the challenges that we are facing as an international community right now, because I asked to see the site where they prepare the food. And there was already relatively limited number of bags of corn and flour present. And then the message was that when these stocks are finished 3 to 4 weeks from now, we don't see how there will be more forthcoming. I mean, you're aware of not least the cuts on the American side. I mentioned that not to single out our American friends specifically. This is just stating a fact. The DRC, as you know, is the size of Western Europe. It's a population of maybe 120 million or so. And of those 120 million, 20% depend on humanitarian assistance for their survival. So in a context where the United States up until now has accounted for 70% of humanitarian assistance and 88% of food assistance, the impact is very real and very direct. In addition to the aggravating and already deteriorating security situation, humanitarian situation, this can also very well have direct implications for the security situation, for the political situation. If you have a population of refugees or displaced on a site or in a camp, they will not just stay there and watch their living conditions deteriorate further. They are very likely to move on. And also, if you talk about the overall humanitarian situation in the East, since the resurgence of the Rwanda-supported M23 rebellion from January onwards, and you saw that first the provincial capital of Goma fell in January in North Kivu, and then the provincial capital of South Kivu, Bukavu, fell in February. This also meant that, according to our humanitarian colleagues, something like 700,000 internally displaced in camps around Goma were more or less forcibly displaced. So when you talk about the Great Lakes, and I'm of course often asked about what's in it for the European Union, what are we doing there, what can we do, what should we do? I mean, first, I think it's pretty obvious there is a humanitarian imperative to be there, given the scale of the suffering. The second reason makes me associate to Frantz Fanon, who is once supposed to have said that Africa has the shape of a gun and Congo is the trigger. If the center of Africa is characterized by deteriorating security, an absence of governance, a security vacuum, that has very real and direct consequences for all the neighboring countries and also for the wider sub-region. And one thing I've noted in my interactions when I've been on mission to different African countries, and not just in the Great Lakes region itself, is the concern with exactly the security implications. So you might know that of all the 200 or so armed groups active in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, the one that stands out as the most murderous, if you wish, is the Islamic State-linked ADF. And so you also have that aspect, and you have fighters linked to those movements who can then turn up in other parts of Africa. So, which means, of course, that for us as Europeans, we have a self-interest in a stable, prosperous, developing Africa. And that leads me to what is, I think one can't emphasize that enough, that we talk about and we dream of green and digital transition in Europe. But I mean, the rainforest of the DRC, that's the second largest carbon sink in the world after the Amazon rainforest. But Congo, as you know, the Belgian colonizers at the time used to refer to the country as a geological scandal because of the richness in the topsoil of different minerals and the purity of, for example, the copper. You have something like 70% of the world's reserves of cobalt are in the DRC. And cobalt, that means, for example, batteries, including electric car batteries. You have in the Kivus, I mean, the epicenter of the fighting ongoing now, more than 70% of the world's reserves of coltan, and as you know, our smartphones, iPads, and so on and so forth won't work without that. One can go on like that. There is a long list. I think it's very clear that, you know, we also have a self-interest in stability and security in this particular part of the world. Now, with what has happened with with the region, I think it's also important to remember that the developments in the Great Lakes region also take place in a context of a rules-based international order that is increasingly under pressure and under stress. And I think I can say honestly that there is also a will to see more of the European Union member states in the region to be actively engaged, because in the type of international political landscape we're facing right now, it sometimes feels as if we're the last kid on the block standing up for some form of principle, some type of adherence to rules and to morals. And that is something that is seen and felt in the region. So there is also an expectation on the European Union to contribute and to be active. Then I should just say that what is very clear from my mandate, which is pretty interesting reading when I look through it, because it's sort of the classic multilateral Christmas tree with a lot of things added to it. But what is very clear is that I am not supposed to turn up in the region with European solution or European ideas about how this particular country on that particular region should fix its problem. So my message is that we are there to support African solutions for African problems and regional African solutions for regional African problems. This is something we've already been engaged in for quite some time with the different regional peace processes that have been taking place. And that can be in terms of capacity building, that can be in terms of technical assistance, but we are not there to replace the region because we can't. And in this context, I should say, without going into details about that, I'm happy to come back to it later during the Q&A. It's sometimes a bit challenging because you have multiple parallel regional initiatives ongoing. So one of my messages or recurring messages actually, is to say that we are here as partners, we are ready and willing to engage, but we also need to know what it is you want us to engage with. And the region has to take the lead. Then also, if you look at specific messages, which could also, just to give you an idea about what the engagements look like. I mean, the fundamental message is, of course, that there is no military solution to the conflict. This is something that can only be settled through a negotiated political solution. Having said that, if we look at what we have been trying to do also through the European Union's strategy for the Great Lakes, the three pillars, if you wish, is to focus on support to regional cooperation on peace and security, sustainable resource management, and also regional economic integration, where we do believe that the European Union has a story to tell. And I just want to emphasize the aspect of regional economic integration, because the way I look at the Great Lakes, one of the many things that stand out is that you have a very high level of informal economic integration between the different countries. And a bit surprisingly is that, for example, Congo, if I remember correctly, is Rwanda's largest or second largest export destination. And the same thing goes for the DRC. So at the grassroots level, there you can talk about economic integration, but this is highly informal. And ultimately, what will be needed is, and there I think the European Union can support, it's ways to envisage steps toward deepened economic integration. And this is also a very consistent message from economic operators in all these countries. As you know, there is a lot of focus on the drivers of the conflict, which of course include resources. You have the critical raw materials, rare earth, you have gold is another example. What is sometimes lost in translation, that is not just minerals and the gold, as I mentioned, but you also have things like charcoal. You have even trafficking of game meat. And where things get very tricky is when you try to look more closely at the different flows of the minerals. I mean, we know that many of the neighboring countries, including Rwanda, export minerals that did not enter Rwanda in a legit way. But this does not only go for Rwanda. So if you look at gold, for example, you will see that the Rwandan gold exports are substantial, and a fair amount of that will come from the DRC, not all of it illicitly. But if I remember correctly, I think Ugandan gold exports dwarf the Rwandan. So by some, I think a factor of 3. So in the situation we are now, what we have been very clear on when it comes to the messaging from the European Union is, and here our High Representative Kaja Kallas is crystal clear on this, and that's the issue of territorial integrity, that we do not want to end up in a situation where we are accused of double standards, because the classic argument that you will hear is sometimes, unfortunately, in the region is that, okay, Russia, the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, there is the European Union up in arms, but why are you silent about this particular conflict? So here, I can honestly say that the European Union is very clear. I've also had the opportunity to convey that message on 2 occasions to the Rwandan interlocutors, including President Kagame, that the territorial integrity of the DRC has to be respected. Uninvited Rwandan troops should leave and go back, and furthermore that the Rwandan support for the Congolese M23 rebel movement has to stop. We also, of course, bring up the issue of the illicit exploitation of raw materials in the DRC by Rwanda. Another message which I think is very important given the context is of course that we keep calling on Congolese authorities to cease cooperation with armed groups such as the FDLR, meaning the Hutu extremists. But it's also the issue of hate speech, xenophobia, ethnic politics, which keep undermining solutions in the region. Then when it comes to the different humanitarian messages here it's something we've talked about in our meetings today with the minister and with Michael, is also to convey very clearly the importance of the establishment of humanitarian corridors, secure humanitarian access. You're aware of the dramatic situation in Goma, also because the airport is closed, the need to get the airport functioning again. So all in all, and just to sort of try to come back to where I started, I mean, how I look at my mandate and how I've looked at it since the start. An important point is also in my role to be able to try to establish what I call some sort of joint situational awareness within the European family, between the embassies on the ground, between the European institutions. Because if we don't have a minimum of convergence amongst ourselves, it's going to be very challenging for us to push for the goals of the Great Lakes strategy when we engage with our interlocutors there. But again, there are definitely expectations on the European Union in the region, and to an extent that I was perhaps naively not prepared for when I took up this role. So sometimes in engagements, when I ask what, you know, a minister or a president believes that the European Union should do or what we can contribute to, sometimes the answer is one, you know, a bit incredulous, that, but you are the European Union, you can do anything. So it's sometimes a challenge in trying to be realistic as well about matching expectations to reality. But I know that this is a very impressive group of spectators. So I think I will round off now to allow for a Q&A, and it's also my good opportunity for me to say hello to all of those who have joined us over the webcast. So.
Oops. Thank you so much for that really interesting conversation, or start to the conversation.
Yeah,
we have 20 minutes, so we're looking forward to the questions that will follow. I have loads of questions. I can see some questions coming in online, and I see a hand already raised in the audience. What I will ask for our participants is, for those who are raising a question, please introduce yourself, your name, and also your institutional affiliation. I'm going to start with questions in the room, and I'm going to keep a close eye on those coming in online. And I see the gentleman's hand here is raised. Please go ahead.
Hi, Paddy Smith, Irish Times. Two quick questions, probably not resulting in quick answers, but first I wanted to ask you about the talk of a deal that Trump is apparently negotiating in which the Americans supposedly will provide a degree of security in exchange for access to DRC minerals. It isn't clear to me that is actually happening, but I'd welcome your response to that. And secondly, in relation to DRC governance, I know this must be a very tricky issue for you, but I wondered if you would like to comment on the likely return of Kabila to the DRC, and whether you think that this can introduce a new dynamic that would be welcome or not.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to ask you to respond to those questions, and then I have three more to follow. So
Okay, cool.
please go ahead.
Yeah, so and thanks for the question. I'm as familiar as you are with what is being reported in media, of course, about a deal. You will also know that the special advisor, I think is the term the Americans use, of the White House to the Great Lakes, Dr. Mohamed Poulos, was recently on a tour of the Great Lakes, including in Kinshasa and Kigali. The messaging coming out of those meetings, at least what was publicly stated, did not allude directly to a deal with minerals or security for minerals. So I think so. That's one thing. The other thing is just to say that when it comes to the United States in the region, I mean, we try to work closely with all partners, and that includes the United States government. So I am, for example, part of something called the International Contact Group for the Great Lakes. There are a couple of European countries who also have envoys or representatives for the Great Lakes. So we are there, but also I have an American colleague and a British colleague and so on. I also work very closely with Ambassador Xia, who is a Chinese French-speaking ambassador based in Nairobi, who is the special envoy of the Secretary General of the United Nations. So we try to coordinate as best as we can. I think these are also early days when it comes to what we will see coming out of the American administration in relation to the Great Lakes. You know, just stating the obvious and coming back to the numbers I was throwing at you and your friends in the audience about minerals, you know, cobalt, coltan, lithium, you have it. This is, of course, also of interest to the American tech industry. And you will also have seen, and then I guess I should let the Americans answer for themselves, but again, stating what's reported, you will have seen that in the ongoing escalation when it comes to trade between the United States and China, China has communicated that they are now stopping the exports of a number of critical raw materials to the United States. So this is a very convoluted and complex way of saying I don't think that the interest of the United States for the regions will be reduced in the near future. When it comes to the return of former President Kabila to the DRC, he has repeatedly communicated that he is going to come back. He has also been very clear in his, in his messaging about his criticism of President Felix Tshisekedi. I think this is a good illustration to the fact that this conflict, this situation, is not going to become less complex in the near future.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. David, we'll come to you.
Thanks very much, Johan. Extremely interesting talk. My name is David Donoghue. I'm a former Irish diplomat and former head of Irish Aid. How significant is China as a competitor for the EU in the Great Lakes region? And possibly linked to that, Johan, I mean, would it be fair to say that the new EU strategy for the region is slightly less explicit on issues around rule of law and human rights and so on, and more assertive around the need for economic integration, economic cooperation? I mean, that may be an unfair criticism, but I was just wondering how you would present the EU strategy. Obviously, there have been traditional priorities for the EU around rule of law and so on, but in these more pragmatic days, I wonder, has some of that got sacrificed to the need to take care of other partners or address other partners?
Yeah, many thanks for that. I think when it comes to the strategy, and I know that you're comparing the 2023 strategy with, I think it was 2012 or 2013, we had in EU speak a strategic cooperation framework. And it's true that there was less emphasis back then on the importance of regional economic cooperation. I wouldn't say that aspects of rule of law, for example, has been sacrificed to make room for more emphasis on economic cooperation. I would see it as, you know, the focus on the role of the economy has been substantially increased and takes more space now. I fundamentally think that this is a good thing. And why do I that? I think it's a good thing because when I look at what is happening in the Great Lakes, this is like a gigantic example of political economy gone terribly wrong. There are so many actors who, you know, official actors on all sides of the borders, armed groups, dodgy businessmen, legit economic operators, but all with an interest in the status quo. And that makes it of key importance to, as I put it before, to work towards a formalization of what is now informal. And hope-inspiring has been in exchanges with businessmen and businesswomen in DRC, Burundi, Rwanda, and Uganda, and that here there is a type of convergence between them because they also see the reality on the ground. And I mean, people are trading. The ethnicities are not neatly, you know, behind the borders of the Berlin Conference of 1884-85. So for the people on the ground, the borders are, you know, but it's about looking into how this can be done in a much better way. And I do believe that the EU, again, has a story to tell when it comes to regional economic integration. Then, of course, and this is something we're very clear on in all our messaging, that part of our value added in this strange geopolitical setting we have now is our attachment to values, to rule of law, to democratization, because that now stands out in a positive way. And I note that in interaction with colleagues from other continents, there is far less criticism, to be blunt, of the European Union these days, and far more of hope of engagement because of some of the alternatives out there.
So we have a large number of questions flying in online, and I know I have two people in the audience here waiting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one more question from the audience, or sorry, three people in the audience waiting. One more question from the audience. I'll take some from online, and I'll come back then to the remaining two in the audience, if that's okay. So I'll start with the gentleman at the back of the room there. And then I will take one from our online audience and make sure that we have their voices represented.
Thank you, Ambassador Borgstam. I'm Ahmed Suleiman from Chatham House Africa Programme. Good to see you. So you talked about mediation efforts, and I wonder if you could elaborate on the role of Qatar and whether or not it still has a role to play as an ally of the Rwandan president in particular. And also further in the Gulf, you mentioned the economic interests and particular gold. Are you looking at the kind of supply chains and interconnectivity with gold, in particular going through Uganda? We've seen this with Sudan also, that the majority of Africa's gold, licit and illicit, is ending up in the United Arab Emirates. So they also have an important role to play in engaging on these issues and supporting peace.
Yes, thank you for that. I mean, you saw the meeting between President Tshisekedi and President Kagame in Qatar. In principle, it's of course always a good thing when two adversaries meet face to face. This was a bit of a particular context given the ongoing African regional efforts to get things moving. And there are a lot of interpretations to what actually led up to this particular engagement. What seems clear is that the Qataris have been serious in ensuring that it's not just a one-off, and you also saw their efforts to get direct talks between the Congolese government and the M23 representatives. You also mentioned the substantial economic interests of Qatar in Rwanda, but they also have economic interests in the DRC. I'll, look at that in light of your question about gold and Uganda. And what I'll say is this. One of the things that really stood out to me after my first missions in the region was that the discussions in Brussels, for example, where we focus on the dynamics between the DRC on the one hand and Rwanda on the other, which is perfectly normal. We all know that Rwanda has a certain number of troops on Congolese soil, uninvited. We know that Rwanda actively supports the M23 movement. However, I was a bit surprised that we don't acknowledge the role of the other actors. Uganda is one such actor, Burundi is another. And if you look at how these countries look at the situation themselves, a very clear message to me repeatedly have been from all the countries that are Great Lakes countries that, we need to have a seat at the table. This also concerns us. So, a bit of a surprise at people sitting in a different continent and talking about the conflict as if there is only Kinshasa and Kigali. This is bigger. It's a regional problem. It has to have a regional solution.
Very good. And actually, on that point, I'm going to bring in Nicola Brennan here, who is online.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Hello, Nicola.
Nicola asks the question, how can the EU support the newly appointed EAC SADC mediators and the President of Chad recently appointed by the AU to take over from the President of Angola?
Yeah, many thanks, Nicola. Very happy that you're spying on me. Much appreciated. I think there are a number of ways that we can support this mediation effort. There's 5 former heads of state government in Africa that have been appointed facilitators to a merged process. I think you're all aware of the so-called Luanda process and Nairobi process. Now there, as I understand it, the objective is to establish a secretariat, most likely in Nairobi. One can imagine a whole series of ways of the European Union to support this effort. I had an exchange with my Kenyan colleague, the Kenyan Great Lake Envoy, Ambassador Keter, about, I think, a week ago. And one of my messages to him was that we need to find out and understand as soon as possible what the exact setup is so that we can better support. Because I mean, then you have all the member states. Ireland certainly has a proud history when it comes to supporting mediation efforts. But the European Union institutions as such have a whole series of instruments at their disposal to support mediation efforts. And it can be very concrete, hands-on type of support, capacity building, negotiation teams, helping the establishment of SOPs and so on and so forth. So we will support, that's already very clear. Our partners know that we will support, but they also need to explain and show to us and to present their demands, because I don't want to end up in a situation where we tell them what we are going to do, where we tell them how we will support them. I mean, our role is to listen to them and to better understand their requirements and demands, and then we adapt and tailor make what we can offer.
Thank you very much for that. And we are 2 minutes to go, so I do know
I have
3
oceans of
left.
time, so be careful what you hint to.
Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to invite the questions, and then you can respond, and I will make sure that we are closing up by 2 o'clock. So to start with, the first question online that I feel the need to come back to bring the voice of Irish development actors into this room. So Russell Gates, who's the Regional Director for Central Africa and the Great Lakes for Concern Worldwide, asks, I think, a question that's on many people's mind, which is, the humanitarian needs have been exploding whilst humanitarian response has been very seriously hit. Do you see the European Union taking a greater role on some of the fundamental infrastructure underpinning the humanitarian response and funding of life-saving activities that has been ceased essentially by other governments? Before you answer that, I am going to invite Simon to make your comment, and then I'll come to yourself in the corner, and then that's the last 2 questions. So please go ahead.
Simon Murtagh from DOCUS, which is the Alliance of International NGOs in Ireland. Just specifically on Global Gateway, for people who don't know what it is, it will appear to be an EU policy or initiative to rival China's, obvious kind of strategic interest in that area. To what extent can it have a higher standard, linked to the question David asked, in terms of being less extractive, having higher social and environmental standards, and creating a development path for Congo in particular? I know it looks at different areas which are for example, forestry and agriculture, as well as the ones you've mentioned.
Thank you, Simon. And just the last question there, and we've got about 30 seconds, so I will ask you to
Thank
be swift
you.
as possible. Thank
So
you.
I'm Leo. I work for Concern Worldwide as well, just as Russell Gates. So it's actually a question that's going to be a follow-on on the previous two, on the global gateway and how it can be articulated in the context of the DRC, where the global gateway is meant to encourage investments in the economic fabric. But when that economic fabric is so closely linked to conflict dynamics, how can that be articulated in a do no harm approach?
Thank you, Leo. And I am sorry, Johan, but I'm going to ask you to respond to those questions in about 30, 60 seconds, maybe.
Okay, 60 seconds. That's going to be tricky. And, you know, feel free to assault me after the meeting. I'm happy to engage bilaterally or trilaterally or whatever. I think the context of the humanitarian crisis, this is something that is deeply disturbing. The humanitarian situation in the Great Lakes, particularly in DRC, was extremely serious before the escalation, resurgence of fighting from January onwards. But I mean, you know, the figures I gave you before speak for themselves, but we have to understand that this is a humanitarian crisis playing out in a context where you have often almost a virtual absence of any state representative, absence of basic infrastructure. And a colleague from the Red Cross in DRC put it very well, because he said that the challenge for the humanitarian actors now is that they are faced with both an immediate protection crisis, not least in relation to the high number of IDPs. And I mean, you also have absolutely horrific figures of sexual and gender-based violence, for example. But you have a protection crisis related to IDPs. And remember that many of these IDPs are on their second, third, or fourth displacement. But this immediate protection crisis is also combined with a structural crisis, because it plays out to the backdrop of systemic neglect, absence of governance, corruption, these 200 armed groups that I referred to. So the funding cuts now means that humanitarian colleagues who were already under tremendous strain are now having to juggle two types of crisis, and they neither have the requisite skills, competence, finance to do that. And I think the humanitarian response plan for the Democratic Republic of Congo this year, last time I checked, it was only filled to 7.8%. So this is going to escalate, and it will, on top of the human suffering, it will also have direct political consequences. Then when it comes to the global gateway, and I don't know, in 15 seconds, explain in relation to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, how we can ensure higher standards and do no harm. I would like to look at that in what I said before of, you know, this weird geopolitical landscape where suddenly the European Union has a real value added, because we at least want to believe that we stand up for something. So when it comes to higher standards, do no harm, I think that's very much, that is our value added now. That is what we can compete with, if you wish, but it's also what makes the European Union an attractive partner. So I stop there.
Thank you so much. And it's very, very clear we could have had a much, much longer conversation today. And I'm very struck by the comment that you made that the European Union is considered or considers itself to be the last kid standing on the block when it comes to upholding of rules, rights and morals. So I want to say a huge thank you to you today.
Thank you to you and your colleagues and the audience.
Very briefly, just want to say thanks very much to the audience online, to the audience here with us today for the fantastic range of questions, and a huge thanks to Jill Donoghue and the team here at IEA for facilitating this conversation today. Wishing you all a great day.
Thank you.